trying to illustrate that, things to look for. Anything out of the ordinary along the beach. A pier, a point, a little sandy mound, a jetty that's not even out into the water, an old jetty. All kinds of things. Just anything that breaks up the beach in any way will cause a differentiation.
Another thing we didn't really talk about, if we can get to it, but tides play a huge deal. Yeah, and you want to fish tides where you have a lot of moving water. Because when things are moving, usually things are happening. So when you get those steep tides, it's usually a good time for things to happen on the beach.
When you say moon, meaning
New moon. Yeah, new moon tides tend to be a little bit better than full moon, because full moon tides fish feed at night.
And it's a change of a time? Is there tides are
It
changing?
depends if you're fishing in a low incoming. Like if I was fishing for Corvina in the summertime, I'd want a low incoming tide, a drastic tide, so I could see the beach and watch those fish come up on the beach. If I was fishing in an area that I know has got structure, I might want to fish from the middle of the tide to the full, to the high, or from the high down, so that there's a lot of moving water.
Okay, anybody else want to comment about tides?
One thing, beach structure changes daily. A couple of weeks ago, Shane and I were fishing down at the Santa Ana River mouth, and we found this good trough. We caught numerous yellowfin croaker. We came back 2 days later, and it's gone. So when I look, key factors down on the beach is soft sand. If there's a lot of soft sand around, you'll find that the troughs are going to change probably hourly. Yeah.
One of the best things you can do with surf fishing is be persistent with the beaches that you have access to. Be there a lot. Be there at different times of the year. Watch how the sand changes. In the winter, you'll notice the sand gets removed. In the summer, it gets placed back up on the beach, and the structure's going to be changing all the time. But you will start to see patterns if you visit your beach often enough.
You know, the winter storms that we're getting, you know, that's great for the beach fishing. You know, we welcome those big storms that come in from the Pacific, because they beat the hell out of the beach, and a couple of months later we have beautiful troughs. And like Gary says, in the summertime they're already filled in. So it will change. It's just, that's the nature of the game.
Now, we've been talking a lot about fishing these sandy beaches. Do you ever fish the more rocky areas, you know, where there's tide pools and gravelly beaches and stuff like that?
Absolutely.
So rocky areas are really great for diverse habitat. You'll find algae and copepods and small critters attached to the rocks, and that places for bait fish to hide, and predator fish come in. You'll find kelp snapper and so forth. You will have to deal with or modify your tactics accordingly because you're likely to hang up. You might want to use something like bend back flies or weed guarded flies in those circumstances, so that you're not constantly breaking yourself off, breaking flies off, rebuilding feeders. But sandy areas adjacent to rocky areas, and even sometimes actually in the rocks as well, seasonally perch can be found very tight to rocks, and halibut can be found tight to rocks because they tend to be acting a predator role for bait fish that are schooling in tight in shallow water that are protected by rocks. So absolutely, and in fact, in terms of experiencing a wide variety of species, while there's a risk of losing a fly line head or something like that, there's very strong benefits to fishing in diverse habitat.
One thing you want to mention here is in the wintertime, sand is pulled off the beach. Those big swells, they tend to expose what's called like a cobble. So we've all seen those beaches that are sandy, and then all of a sudden you'll drive by in the wintertime, and it's all those big cobblestones. Don't want to fish over those structures. Those cobbles will pretty much, you'll put a fly in there, you'll feel it ticking along. Eventually your fly gets sucked in there and you're stuck, and you'll do a short work on a fly line. So those beaches can be great in the summer, but the sand that's not there in the wintertime will make it harder to fish. So I would steer clear of those beaches, but beaches where the sand comes up next to those, That's a juxtaposition of habitat, that's always a good transition zone. Anytime you see anything in the surf, look for a zone where it changes habitat. Anytime you have that, you're gonna find fish right on that scene. Just be aware that you can have some attrition in your gear. Lose probably one head a year, just trying to be right next to those rocks for that big howler, but it's just part of the game we play.
Yeah, this is new for me, so I may be asking some basic questions. Am I correct in understanding that if I'm using a sink tip line, that the length of my leader, it's not like fishing in freshwater on a river, at say 9 feet, that it's maybe 6 feet. That long?
5 feet, 6 feet.
Say that again, can't hear
Okay,
you.
his question was about leader length. What length should his leader be? Tim?
Any length you want, more or less. In high surf, you may want a shorter leader because you tend to be using sinking lines. And the other thing to mention is a lot of people, not necessarily always, but a lot of people use jig-style flies in the surf. So the mechanism of turning over a fly that you're used to with dry fly or very lightweight flies in a stream application is not particularly necessary because the fly is weighted and it carries itself through the cast. So you don't really have to be too fussy about leaders except for under certain specific conditions. If you can use a longer leader and it's very calm, then and you're happy with that, go for it. But don't worry your leader too much. You can use a range from 9 feet to 3 feet.
What size cast?
That depends on where you are. My view of things, and there may be some differences on the panel here, is that in the past, when everyone, years ago, 10, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, when people were fishing with bait and the view of the sporting angler was to use light line in order to give the fish a chance to escape the bucket. Now, with a lot of catch and release angling, the focus is more on the fish's welfare if you're planning on catching and releasing a lot of fish. And so, if the fish are insensitive to heavy lines, I would say use heavy lines, and especially if you're going to be fishing next to structure where you might hang up. I actually use 12 to 15 pound test quite frequently on a 6-weight rod, which is ridiculous for the rod, but I'm fishing in structure. If I'm fishing on a beach that's just purely sand, you can go down to 6 to 8 pounds.
Steve, is that a tapered leader, or is that a straight leader, or what are we talking about?
Usually flies in the surf are weighted flies, so they're heavier, they're harder to turn over, so a tapered leader works better for that. And I tend to go as short as I possibly can. I don't encourage long leaders in any way, shape, or form. It creates sailing loops, it's hard to turn over in the wind. And most of the flies, you saw them in the back, they have some serious weight on them. They might be this big. When we have a grunion run in the surf, the flies are 4 inches long, so most leaders are accommodated by the kind of fishery you have. So in general, I encourage anglers to stay in touch with their fly. Shorter leaders are easier to feel because that fly gets down, it comes tight right away. So a 9-foot leader has more bend in it. You can't feel that fish as fast. A 6-foot leader, that fly comes tight almost right away. A 4-foot leader works really well. So, and I encourage you to use some sort of fluorocarbon type material. It's more abrasion resistant. It tends to sink better. We're putting these lines in there, and we're putting these leaders almost on the bottom, and we're right near structure. Those kind of leader materials work better when you're dragging that fly right on the sand. So I would encourage you to go shorter to start. As you get more skills, as you cast, you can lengthen your leader, but those shorter leaders will help you turn over those weightier flies.
The only other thing I might add is that if you can fish the heavier stuff, it doesn't tangle as much. So if you're going with the 6-pound stuff and you're just beginning to do this, you end up with a lot of tangles with a lighter material. So if you can fish 10 pound, which is probably reasonable, it won't tangle as much.
Question back here.
Question?
Peter, you said fluorocarbon sinks faster than mono?
Yes.
It does.
Yes, answer.
Yeah. It works really well, guys. It's It's meant to sink. Plus, it's less visible in the water.
If you're just starting out, actually, you can't go wrong just going really cheap, really simple, 6 feet of 8-pound